Welcome back to another episode of Boomer Bust, the flagship program for this channel. I'm your host Terry, and today we gonna clock a good hour, at least an hour we clocking today. If you like long form, perfect. If you don't, man, it kind of sucks. But you know what? I might, if I got some time, I'll try to sit down and time code it. So if you are listening to this, go to the description, because I'm not really sure how to do the chapters, but go to the description and I might have some time codes in there. But if it's not there, then I didn't do it. So anyway, going to talk about the draft. We are what, 4 weeks away, like a month away. We getting there. I want to just kind of talk about a couple things in terms of draft in general, and then I want to talk about this draft class in general, and then we'll go through the positions and kind of give an overview. So this isn't necessarily drilling in on any one particular thing. It's just more of a large kind of overview. So there we go. The first thing, what do I want to say about the draft in general? There's one thing that's on top of my head. Maybe the other thing will come to me. So as we are in draft season, and this is my 20th draft for anyone that might be new. So I've been doing this for a long time, man. Learning a lot, seeing a lot, blah, blah, blah. And I've been talking about the last few years, this idea of the draft game versus roster building game. Or let's just keep it like that. So, and I repeat these things for new viewers, but I think every year try to find different ways to articulate it, get better at it. But for me, I think when we're talking about the draft game, that encompasses all the teams. You know what I mean? We're talking about, we're more so looking at players and then how they relate to certain teams. So, for example, we can think about Travis Hunter. If we're talking about, hey, where range would Travis Hunter go? Would he even be in the range of my team here? Could he possibly go past 5, blah, 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 whatever. So the reason we talk about that is to see, again, what range, not only will players go in terms of their draft stock and who was right about mock drafts, really none of that matters. It's more so about who's going to be available and what range of picks. But when we're talking about roster building, that's when we're talking about one specific team. And that, at the end of the day, is what matters. Yes, the draft game impacts the roster building, obviously, because in a real way, who is going to be available where impacts what the team is going to do and who they ultimately end up drafting. But in terms of when we get on the field and everything, to me, is more about the roster building. And I say that to say, because even if you talk about a specific player, like, and I've probably did this example before. Let's say, trying to think of somebody. Let's say Shedeur, and we'll talk about Shedeur. And I know I talked about him before, but look, I'm sorry, that's the best example that you could pick. Let's say a Shedeur. So if you get a Shedeur Sanders, if we're talking about just him in terms of the draft game, let's say, let me think of it. I don't even know a good team right now. Let's say the Saints, whatever. Let's go with the Saints. Let's say the Saints got Shedeur. In the draft game, you could say, hey, Shedeur is ranked as the number 2 quarterback. A lot of people think he's a top 5 pick or whatever. We got him at 9. Draft game tells you, oh, we did good. But when you talk about roster building, and the Saints definitely do need a quarterback of the future, but the offensive line had massive troubles last year. You got a former top pick in Penning who just hasn't really, he definitely didn't turn out to be the left tackle you wanted. Fuaga did pretty well, and we'll see how that looks. But your right tackle, Ramchak, pretty much lost his career with injuries potentially. And just the interior, it didn't play well. And then I can't even think of the Saints head coach. Kellen Moore, I guess he came in. So Kellen Moore's fine. But let's just play in the fantasy world. Let's say it was still Dennis Allen. If you had Dennis Allen, not the best, that's going to really help the quarterback. The offensive line is not looking great. Olave has a ton of concussions. We don't know when he'd be back. Shaheed popped out, but then got hurt coming off an injury. So when you got a team, or you got a player, I should say, in Shedeur, that is going to thrive on timing, that's going to thrive on anticipation, yards after the catch, things like that, short area throws, that's not a great fit for him. So the roster building would tell you this might not be great. And we've seen that so many times over the years where a team gets a player who's ranked, quote unquote, as a top 10 prospect, whatever, but it just never fits what their roster needs and what their team, not even what they need, but what it doesn't have a natural fit with that team. Versus, like, and I've used this before, Jalen Carter, where he goes to the Eagles, where roster building wise, that might have been darn near perfect. And a lot of people are like, hey, they got Jordan Davis and this and blah, blah. But look, you knew Fletcher Cox was coming towards the end. You knew Brandon Graham was coming towards the end. And so not only are you building for the future, but you get the benefit of Jalen Carter's transition being around those veterans and everything else that I talked about with him going to the Eagles. It was a perfect fit. And in the draft game, it was good too, because he was considered a high thing. So look, the draft game and the roster building game are two different things. The draft game is fun until we get to the draft. Once it's done, no one cares about that too much anymore. We get on into the roster building game. So that's one of the big things that those one of the big concepts of the draft that I always try to talk to people about, because especially where you get a year like this, which I'm spoiling a little bit, even though I said it before, the draft class it's kind of all over the place. And so when you get years like this where there's not a lot of certainty at the top, or there's a lot of grades that are similar, then you get a lot of arguments and people argue about the wrong things. And for me, again, it's not really about where you get drafted or like when you get drafted, but where you get drafted. That's always going to be more important to me. And so fit, that matters more than like, haha, I was right, he went in the top 10. Now look, I've been in that before. As I said, 20th draft. I've evolved over years in many ways. That's one of the ways I evolved, because definitely I fall into that trap too. And that's before mock drafts were popular. Now it's like cool thing. You got hella websites where you could do simulations and all this stuff. Mock drafts weren't even super cool at one point, but still you got into that. It's natural to get into that. Hey, I think this guy is a top 20 pick. Oh crap, he went in top 10. I told you. That doesn't ultimately matter. That draft game stuff isn't as important. So that's something I'll say. I also say this in that same vein. It only takes one team. It only takes one team to like a player and draft them. And so especially when we get into the discussion about bust and stuff, which again, the pendulum has swung as it does in America society. It always swings from one extreme to another, but it definitely has swung where, people will call people bust, but for the most part, people blame teams now, especially when it comes to quarterbacks. They blame teams and, they didn't develop them. That word develop, which is a word, it's a concept, it's a reality, but not in a way that is used in the world of football today. In the world of the NFL, people use that as a catch-all. They don't even know what it means, but yeah, that's the discourse now. But even still, my point has always been like, it just because, this is a top 5 pick, you got to blah, blah, blah. Now, I do agree that as a team, when you decide to spend that resource on a player, you are expecting a certain type of return. But the idea that this team took this guy, I'm trying to think of a good example. Darius Hayward-Bay always comes to my mind from the Raiders, but that was a while ago. I'm trying to think of a recent one. I don't even want to say Michael Penix, but sure, let's just say Penix. So Penix goes, actually it doesn't matter. Let's just say it's player X. It's Bobby Joe. Bobby Joe gets drafted at number 5. And prior to the draft, there was debate. Is he a first round pick? Is he a second round pick? Late first round, probably, whatever. He goes number 5. Does that, people act, and by people I mean media and fans, react as, he's a top 5 player in this draft. He is one of the 5 best players in this draft. That's not what it means. It just means that particular team looked at him a certain way. And that's why we are in the world of quarterbacks now, where quarterbacks get pushed up, because if a team convinces themselves on that quarterback, they're going to take that quarterback. Does that mean they're better than all the people they went after or before? No. But I think a lot of times people treat it that way. And so, again, when you talk about learning from mistakes, getting away from things, that's something I have to get away from. Like this argument of the draft game, where this person's going to go. I told you, this is how the league looked at him. Now, here's what I will say. That is true as far as getting drafted high. It's not necessarily true as far as getting drafted low. So if I say Bobby Joe, I think he's a top 20 pick. 100% a top 20 pick. Like most people going to see it in the league. And he goes number 5 again. Doesn't mean he's necessarily a top 5 pick. That team might have fell in love. But on the opposite end, if Bobby Joe goes in the 4th round, well, obviously I was wrong. Because now at that point, once you get past the 1st round, especially, that's the league talking at that point. Because not only does every team get to go in a normal draft, but teams get a chance to double back, whether they got picks already or they can trade into. And so that, once you get past the 1st round, and obviously the 2nd round is still kind of a mix. But if you go in the 4th round, there's no discussion. Teams did not see you as that type of player. The whole league passed on you, not once, 2, but 3 times. And so I will say it doesn't quite work that way. But as far as getting drafted high, that's how it goes. It only takes one team. And again, I hate to come back to this, but Shedeur is that same thing, which is, and I won't even say I hate to come back to it, because the entire media is telling you the exact same thing. I don't know why some of these people, maybe they're Colorado fans, maybe they're Prime fans, maybe they are misguided pro-black fans. I'm one of the most pro-black. But this ain't one of those situations where he's being discriminated against. Absolutely not. And so the whole entire media, what are they talking about right now? If he doesn't go to 3, he might slide. If he doesn't go at 3, he might slide. If he gets past the Giants, he might slide. That tells you everything you need to know. What are we talking about? It's not controversial to say that. But anyway, we'll get to that. So, yes, Shedeur is a good example. If the Giants took him, if the Browns took him, see, he's a top 5 pick, top 5 in the draft. No, one team. It was one team. So there's that. All right. So I can't remember anything else that I was going to say on that level as far as just big picture ideas. So I'll talk about draft class. So this draft class, as I mentioned before, weird class. I keep forgetting. I just looked this up. Hold on. Forgive me. I want to say it was the 2021 draft, 2022 draft. So the 2022 draft might be the only other draft that I can remember off the top of my head that was this weird, because that was the draft with Aiden Hutchinson and Kenny Pickett was the first quarterback, went to the Steelers in the 20s. Malik Willis, I think like third round, and Matt Corral, he didn't go until later. And you had people saying that Malik Willis and Matt Corral should have been top 3 picks to the Panthers or whatever. And Matt Corral's not even in the league no more. But anyway, so that was a draft where I was like, yeah, it's very clear the quarterback class is like bad. And very much in line with what I said. I was like, Kenny Pickett is the only one that I would even think about doing in the first round. And that, for me, still probably would be a later round pick, but quarterbacks don't really go late round anymore. Now, he did end up going there, and that just shows you it's a special. I mean, because look, we saw what happened with McCarthy. We saw what happened with Bo Nix and Penix. Neither one of them, in my opinion, in evaluation, should have been a top of the first round pick. But we saw what happened. And then on top of that, we see Jackson Dart now in this year. So in a normal year, you're just not going to see quarterbacks late first round, unless it's at the end of the first round where somebody drafts in. But 20s, that usually doesn't happen. So Pickett went in the 20s. And then, like I said, those other guys didn't even go in the first round. But all draft season, which of course nobody remembers now, everybody was trying to make a case for why they should be the top 5 pick. And then Trayvon Walker was number 1 to the Jags. He was a late push as the first number 1 pick. People didn't know who was going number 1. There was no number 1 player. And I don't have that draft pulled up. I'm sure somebody can make a case now. But I can say 100% in a moment, as good as Aiden Hutchinson was in some of his questions, as good as Trayvon Walker was in some of his questions, there was no consensus real number 1 pick. I think Sauce was in that draft too. So that's what it was, and that was a weird draft. Now, that was the draft. I thought it was 21 because we were coming off COVID. So quarantine, because people always say COVID. Quarantine happened March 2020. I remember very well. So I guess the season didn't start yet. So it'd be the 21 season. No, because it would have been in the 2020 season. And that one was limited. And then they did the 21 season, and then we had 22 draft. Either way, it was right after the quarantine, and college had all these, different rules and stuff. So for me, I'm like, okay, yeah, that kind of threw things off. That's why it was a weird draft, and I kind of wrote it off. But now we got another weird draft too, and I do think it still has to do with that quarantine, because this is definitely, we're at the tail end of kind of the, if you want to call it, the COVID babies. The players that came in with extra eligibility, the players that were in college had extra eligibility. I forgot the exact stat, but I saw something that like a high percentage of this draft is like over 22 or something like that. Either way, it's all to say that whether it's Malik Willis, who's been like in college for a minute, Bo Nix last year was super old. We got older players. We got players that took advantage of those COVID years. Even off the top of my head, Nick Scranton, something like that. He played for Purdue. and he was cool, but he came transferred. I can't even remember which school it was, Texas A&M maybe. But he played this year and kind of got his stock up. But you had years of being like decent, but not a top, first round pick. So, in my opinion, I think logically what happened is we are now getting the last batch of players, maybe this year, next year, who just couldn't make it. Because look, at the end of the day, and I was thinking about this, and I can't even remember, I should look it up. The two players that come to mind are Jamar Chase and Nick Bosa. So let me see. Yeah, so Jamar Chase did sit out a whole season. That was right in the middle of the quarantine. Nick Bosa, let me see. I just want to make sure I'm saying this right. Okay, so yeah, Nick got hurt and then left school. Okay, still similar. My point is, you had two players who decided pretty much to take, either way, they took less time in college, less snaps in college, still went to the league, and still got drafted incredibly high. And guess what? They are all pros in the league. And now we got a lot of players in this draft who took extra time in college, took extra snaps in college, and are just now getting to the point where people think they might be first round picks. So what does that tell you? These players are not that great because the great players are going to come out of college early and still get drafted high. And in cases where they don't get drafted high, they can still make impacts. Now, that's just not a blanket thing where you go matters, but in general, that's what's going to happen. And so we have a situation where, again, you just got a lot of players who have been in college for a long time, which tells you, as far as most teams will look at it, if it took you that long to be dominant, and most of these guys aren't dominant, but if it took you that long to be a star in college, why do we think you're going to be able to be a star in the NFL? Now, some players or some teams will look at it and say, well, you have a really high floor, which means you can produce right away. That was the thought process with Bo Nix. Now, to me, if the Broncos didn't draft Bo Nix, he's going in the second round. 100%. I have no doubt he's going in the second round. But either way, whether it's Sean Payton or whatever, Bo Nix came in, showed enough for people to be confident. And we'll see what that goes into. I don't know. I'm not even going to... I mean, I could speculate. I don't care. I don't think he's going to be like a star in the league. But he was able to come in and give some immediate results. So there's two ways to look at it. But at the end of the day, these are not the high star caliber. Because the typical draft, the traditional draft, has always been you get the guys that are aged out and you kind of figure them out. Some are stars and, they stayed for one reason or another. But a lot of them are just, guys that you'll figure out. And then you have a section of extra talented juniors who are coming out early or whatever they are. They're coming out early because they have that type of talent. And usually they're going to be somewhere first, the second, the third round. But now, not only have we had an increase of juniors over the years, including guys that are not ready, that are not stars, but now with COVID, that also has changed, again, things as well. So to me, I think that's what it is. All that to say, you get a draft like 22, where, well, not exactly like 22, but where the quarterbacks are not super exceptional. And so quarterbacks, as we know, as we said, they get bumped up. They change the whole trajectory of the draft. Last year's draft was so, kind of exciting because we knew with so many quarterbacks, good players were getting pushed down, like a Brock Bowers. And the only difference with that draft, I would say, the only caveat is they didn't have pass rushers. So some people might argue, but to me, quarterback and pass rushers, the two premier positions. And so when you have some premier pass rushers and premier quarterbacks, that's the exciting part, because now that starts to push other positions down the line and all those good things. Quarterbacks are going to push pass rushers now. So now you're like, oh, where could this pass rusher go? But that last year they didn't have that. They didn't have an Abdul Carter. Because like even now we're talking about Abdul Carter with a Cam Ward, potentially a Shedeur. Man, Cam or Abdul Carter could end up getting paired up with Myles Garrett, because they're going to take Cam Ward at 1. Very possible. Last year there was no Abdul Carter. Could you imagine if there was? I mean, because then at that point, a Joe Alt gets pushed down. A J.C. Latham gets pushed down. What's his name? Malik Neighbors gets pushed down. And so that's typically, makes a draft intriguing. And so this year, we don't have those quarterbacks to push anyone down. Now, on the flip side, you also just don't have a lot of star power at any position. In a very, very weird situation, which I do remember the year Garrett Bowles got drafted, whatever year that was. Ryan Ramczyk went that year too, where there's not a lot of good tackles. And if you look at that year, I would have to guess there's some good linemen that came out of there, including Ramczyk at tackle, but not a lot of great tackles, at least in the draft process. And that's what we're dealing with this year. Because, like I said, last year, Joe Alt, J.C. Latham, Olu Fashanu, like all that. But imagine if you didn't have those guys. So now our top 3 premier positions, are not there. What happens to the draft? That's kind of what we're dealing with a little bit, because there's a lot of pass rushers, but they're not great. So overall, we got a draft that I would say is deep in some areas. It's not equal across the board, but is not high talented at the premier positions and is not high talented in general. Like in terms of like top 5 prospects. Now, when I say prospects, I'm talking in general, like an average draft, not this draft only. I get into that argument about Shedeur all the time. In this draft, sure, he might go 3. He wouldn't go 3 last year, I can tell you that. So, in general, if you're like, man, this guy probably is a top 5, top 10 pick in any draft, we don't got a lot of those. Really, you only got 2, which is Abdul Carter and Travis Hunter. And Travis Hunter is tough because A, you don't know what he's going to play, and B, neither one of those positions are premier. And so that makes this a kind of toss-up of a draft, because in a situation where you don't have a lot of top talent, what do you usually do? Defer to the premier positions. But those positions aren't great in this draft. So it is a weird combination. And then on top of that, from what I understood, what I heard, I didn't really look at it, but every team has their original first round pick right now. And in the era of the rookie wage scale, once they introduced that, trades have exploded. It's very common to have trades. And so this is a little bit different. This is definitely different. And I still think there will be trades, but it obviously will be closer to the draft. There was a stat that was quoted that there's only one draft that got closer to the draft before first round pick was traded. And I think that was 5 days before the draft, but that was decades ago. I think they said it was like the 80s or something. And so all that to say, this is very unusual. Usually there's a lot of movement. The reason there's not a lot of movement is there's not a lot of conviction. There's not a lot of conviction on this quarterback. There's not a lot of conviction on a receiver. There's not a lot of conviction on a tackle. And so that's kind of where we are. So what does that mean? Kind of similar to what I said last year, but this is an even more extreme version. And I still feel good about last year because, yeah, the top 10 or 15, crazy. But after that, it was kind of pick your flavor. And so, but I feel even more strongly about this year. It's a second and third round type of draft. And again, I know I said that last year, and I know last year's class isn't really similar to this, but that's what it is. Even more so. It's a second and third round type of draft. More so a second round. And it's not only, I would say one of the big differences is the position that's probably the deepest is the D-line. And the O-line is pretty deep too for the most part, but the D-line is very deep. And none of them are stars besides Abdul Carter. So opinions are going to vary, and they're going to get pushed into the second round. And D-line is a premier position. So we're going to see a lot of good players on the interior O-line and the D-line across the board get pushed into the second round. The other thing that I would say about this draft that was what I heard, obviously I don't know, but I kind of figured it out through the tape. A lot of injuries to big names. And we've been getting more. Abdul Carter, which again, not really an injury. People keep saying he has a stress fracture. He has a stress reaction in his foot, not a fracture. So there's questions about that, and he decided not to run his pro day. And then you got, why am I blanking on his, is it Jihad Muhammad? From Alabama. He got surgery on his labrum pretty recently after the combine. So people are talking about him going back to the second round. And it's just, it's people coming off injuries. It's people that didn't have a full season. Obviously, you got Simmons from Ohio State, who people think would be the number one tackle. And he might be in this draft, but honestly, the tape I watched, I didn't see it. But again, there's not a ton of tape, and that's kind of the issue. So that is all kind of bubbling together to make this draft just so weird. Like, where people go is really is a toss up. And I look back last year and previous years, and I'm not going to sit here and act like it was pretty mapped out every year. There's always this kind of variance in these different prospects, but this year I do feel like it's really is more than usual. And then on top of the fact, you got a deep running back class and that's a position that just the draft has not, they've kind of let go by the wayside, much like receiver. And so people are going to have to struggle with that too. Like, as much as people want to say Genty top 5, top 10, Omari Hampton and the Ohio State boys, yeah, it all sounds good, but a team is going to have to sit there and say, yeah, we're going to use that resource on a running back. And again, it only take, I wouldn't say one. It does take one as far as top 10, top 20. But in terms of first round running backs, in terms of passing over some of this other potential talent, I don't know how many teams are going to blink and say, yeah, we'll take the running back. But, that's part of the mystery. It's just, that's the way this draft class is kind of wired. So there's that. All right. I think, yeah, that's pretty much it. I got nothing else to add. So we will go through the positions. I'll kind of give some of my thoughts, opinions, about anything that sticks out. So we'll start with quarterback. I won't spend too long on this because I've said this before. Cam Ward was by and far the number one prospect. I don't understand what this debate is. It maybe it's just gonna happen every year, but by far Cam Ward was the number one prospect. And people have to understand what prospect means when we use that term. We're not talking about best player necessarily. Again, we're not even talking about, when we're talking about prospect, we're talking about a list at that position, a list of what makes up a prospect and who has the best combinations of box check, because all boxes are not equal. You know what I'm saying? Having a good footwork in the pocket is part of being a good quarterback, but it is not equal to having a A+ arm. Those are two different levels. So when we talk about positions as far as coaching and things, we talk about essential what do we call it? Essential techniques, skills, whatever you want to call it. And so there's things that are essential, that are non-negotiable. There's things that are good to have. There's things that are next level, but there's tiers to it. And so when you look at the combination of the different box they check off, that's what makes a prospect. And we're talking about prospects as in projection to what they could be. And so for me, Cam Ward was by and large the number one. Like, Shedeur doesn't even come close. And to be honest, they have some similar weaknesses as well. So with the upside of Cam Ward, I didn't think it was close. As I said before, not a strong quarterback class. And it's weird that I heard that last year, because I don't watch college football. And so I heard it last year while getting ready for that draft. They was like, next year's is woo. And so everyone knew that. So I don't know why people acting shocked now. But anyway, Cam Ward by far the number one. So we got to talk about that. Shedeur already talked about before. The idea of Jackson Dart jumping up now, and the Syracuse quarterback who I believe played for Ohio State the previous year, and he was not great. And then the Louisville quarterback who's been in college for like 10 years or something. Stuff like that. I mean, look, I think that's just part of the draft. Like, especially when it comes to quarterbacks, again, just trying to push those guys up because it's a premier position. But in terms of talking about sleepers or stuff like that, just kind of next tier, I think it's Jalen Monroe. I mean, I've liked Jackson Dart since last year. As I've said, as what I tend to do, but what tends to happen is when I watch a player and I'm watching film, you'll have guys that jump off the screen. And it's like, who is that? And a lot of times it's guys that's not coming out this year. They're coming out next year, and you just keep that in your mind. So Jackson Dart was one of those guys. Matthew Golden was also one of those guys at Houston when I was watching Tank before, back in the day. So it's just like Dart jumped off the screen to me, and he did well this year, and I was like, man, he should be that guy. And then he wasn't, and now he's hot. So I got nothing against Jackson Dart. There's definitely limitations there. There's something to talk about. But Jalen Monroe, I don't see why not. I don't see why not, man. Especially, look, Lamar as an individual, 100% credit. I gave him his credit. He evolved. He played like at a different level this year. We'll see what happens going forward. But at the end of the day, his quarterback game has evolved. But outside of that, people, in terms of archetypes, people love the Lamar Jackson. They love the super fast running quarterback with that could throw it around and blah, blah, blah. So I don't see why Jalen Monroe wouldn't be, like, off that alone. But even past that, for me, I think that he evolved at Alabama, and he showed in enough doses that he could play quarterback and not glorified running back. And in his running ability, I don't know, it's hard sometimes to gauge it from college to NFL, but from my eye, I mean, I don't know that I've seen a better runner in a minute. So I think Jalen Monroe, especially with his huge arm, I think that's someone to look at. So with quarterbacks, it's really Shedeur versus Cam, but I don't think that's really much of a topic. All right, just to let you know, I don't do running backs, but that might change next year. So sorry. I know it's a lot of talk about the running backs. As I said, deep class, that's all I can really tell you. All right, receiver. Obviously, Travis Hunter is kind of a question in general, but you know, that's his own thing. Receiver, not a lot of top of the line talent, but it's hard for me to even say what top of the line talent as far as a prospect looks like. As I've said for years, receivers a dime a dozen. Receivers are at a point where it's pick your flavor, and most styles can be productive in the NFL. So it's hard for me to say what is that makes somebody a top flight receiver. Like if you're an elite speed receiver, is that better than being a really good all-around receiver? I don't know. I think it's really just a case of what your style of offense is. So with that being said, still the NFL does not see top end talent, and I don't necessarily know that I did either, but what I will say, I think it's got good depth, and I think most years are going to have good depth because, like I said, receivers are dime a dozen. But I guess the one thing I say is T-Mac is by far the best out of the group to me, and I know that conversation has shifted, and I don't really understand why. I keep hearing him and people talking about Drake London as a prospect. Now, if you're saying, hey, Drake London and the Falcons, okay, sure. But when I hear things, I typically think prospect for the most part. T-Mac, Tedero is not Drake London to me. He's T. Higgins. The thing that separates him, because most people trying to write it off is like, oh yeah, big body 50-50 receiver. No, not only that, because he has that, but not only that, you look at his ability to get in and out of breaks, his hip fluidity, and then his foot quickness as well. And to me, I'm like, he's much more athletic than a Drake London or Mike Evans. And he ain't as big as Mike Evans, but at first I'm thinking Mike Evans. I can see some of that. And Drake London, I understand, but he's much more T. Higgins. T. Higgins still has been a 50-50 guy. He still has been somebody with a crazy catch radius, even though he never became like as big as Mike Williams or Mike Evans, but he still was kind of that guy, and he gives you a little extra juice. He's a 50-50 guy plus some juice, and that's what T-Mac is to me. And to me, not only probably the most natural catcher out of the group, but gives you a little bit of everything as well. And then after that, Matthew Golden, that's been my guy. As I said, stood out to me back when he was with Houston. Actually, no, he stood out when I was watching Patrick Paul last year, not Tank Dell. But anyway, Golden went to Texas. Great job. And now he's big buzz because of the 40. And this is the stuff I be talking about. And this is why I be like, I wouldn't say, I'll just say it's kind of hard to listen to people when year after year you get people that jump on the bandwagon once they see some numbers, but you couldn't evaluate that on film. So why do I have to think your opinion is so, like, come on, stop it. Anyway, so everybody's on Matt Golden now. People talking about him number one because he ran a super fast 40. But the thing is, and as some of the smart people have said, and the smartest people have said it before the 40, that's not really the big part of his game. Like, yes, he's got speed, but if you look at it, that's not what makes him a great prospect. I think he's really an all-around receiver. Some people are going to be like, oh, yeah, look at the 40, he's a speed receiver. No, you didn't watch the film. He's an all-around receiver. He'll get in there on some blocks. He'll get in and out of breaks in the intermediate. He could take the ball and get some rack yards on a short or, screen. He can go deep on the deep plays as well. He can contest the ball a little bit. He could do a little bit of everything. So Matt Golden has kind of been my guy. But as I said, sleeper-wise, Savion Williams, I'm ultimately intrigued by. And Jalen Royals, from Utah State. It's almost exactly how I felt watching Rashee Rice. And even some people will say Rashee Rice only did what he did because he went to the Chiefs. I can understand that. I think that's not giving him enough credit. But I don't think anything I've seen from him with the Chiefs is what I didn't see as with him coming out as a prospect. That's what I will say. And so Jalen Royals just reminds me of Rashee Rice as a prospect. And yeah, we'll see where he goes, but we saw how Rashee Rice came out. But yeah, overall, it's not a lot to say about receivers, man, because we'll see kind of where they plug in. Offensive tackle, just one of the worst groups, man. It's a tough group. It's a seriously tough group. I kind of mentioned that there's no true tackles. Like Will Campbell, people say his arm's too short. I don't dig into that super heavy. Watching the film, I think he would be fine. But I don't think he's a leader or anything. I think he's probably more suited for right tackle. And I do think he'd be very good at guard. There's not many tackles that I think would be worse at guard. So I'm fine with those discussions, but top 10, definitely not. Kelvin Banks, he's not a hot name anymore. He was never hot on my list. I've talked about that before. And now he's not a hot name for whatever reason. For me, I could not understand how people watch Will Campbell and talked about arm length and not having enough, length in general. But you watch Kelvin Banks and Josh Simmons and said that they are left tackles. I don't understand. Obviously, the league stepped in and said, yeah, no, that's not what we think about Kelvin Banks. So everybody changed their mind. Josh Simmons coming off injury, as I mentioned. But also, again, the tape wasn't that great to me when I watched it. I'm not saying he was bad or anything, but people were saying, oh, he's number one left tackle. He would have easily been a premier left tackle. Again, in this draft, he might have been the number one left tackle. In the league, I don't know that I see like a premier left tackle, but I can get to watch as much. And then after that, it's kind of a grab bag, but you go down the list. Ursery, I think he'll be pretty good. Connerly, I really like, but I think he's a guard. I think he'll be a great guard. I'm higher on Cameron Williams and Emory Jones than anybody else. And a lot of people saying they're going to be right or they're going to be guards, which is kind of crazy to me. They're not the best athletes, but I thought Cameron Williams played better than Kelvin Banks in the tape that I watched. And Emory Jones, I thought, played as good as Will Campbell. They got the length. Again, not the quickest feet, but at right tackle, I think they'll be okay. But a lot of people talking about them at guard. Mball, I forgot his name, from Purdue. He's a guard, 100%. Belton, I really like too. I think he'll be a right guard. Mball, Mbu, whatever his name, from Mizzou. I forgot. He's now the hot name because of his. Again, the combine shouldn't do that. It might do that with the media, but it shouldn't do that in the team. I think on tape, 100% is worthy to be in that top conversation, top 5, top 3 conversation, because it's not a strong draft. I think he's a right tackle. That's what he's going to be. And I think he's got some plus in certain areas, but not an elite prospect, but in this draft, definitely probably one of the better tackles. So overall, you just don't have a lot of faith in these guys from evaluators. There's guys that I definitely I'd be fine with. Now we ain't talking about first round, but or top 10, but there's guys that I'd definitely be fine with if I got them on my team to let them play tackle. But that's the thing, is that the supply is so short that a lot of these guys might go higher than you might be willing to stomach. Like I said, for me, there's not one guy I named that I wouldn't be interested in having on my team. But when you say it'll be at a top 10 pick, I don't know that I'm signing off on any of these guys personally. All right, so interior O-line, I think this is going to be a deeper group. It's deeper than even the guys that I watched. I know that for sure. But I think Booker and Donovan Jackson are just A-plus lock prospects. People are talking about second round now. We'll see. Again, this draft is kind of all over the place. But I think in general, when you talk about the converts from tackle, it's going to be a really strong interior O-line class. I think much stronger than the tackle class. But some rock stars, as they say, at the top with Booker and Jackson. And then the actual interior O-line, and then guys that'll probably be converted from tackle. I think that's going to be a pretty deep position. Tight end, it's going to be great. It's going to be interesting. Fannin ran a really slow time, but, it is what it is. Like, tight ends are very much dime a dozen too, but Tyler Warren, I think, is great. Loveland, crazy potential. Taylor, good potential. Gunnar Helm, I think he's got great potential, but people haven't been talking about him. And I know he's not the athlete that these other guys are, but I think he's got great potential. Royo's getting a lot of love. Like, it's a really good tight end class. That's all I can really say about that. The D-line class, that's the talk of this, man. I've been talking so long, I don't know that I got enough time to even talk about this. It is tough. It's tough. It's tough to really put my finger on it. I think in general, you got a ton of tweeners. And to be honest, I'm at the point where I don't write tweeners off, but I'm comfortable in saying tweener is not a great thing. And we see that even with some of these linebackers. We see that over time with people like, yo, man, he could do this and that and that. He did this, and that. And in the league, for the most part, it doesn't work out. Tweeners either just don't pan out, or they pan out because they stuck to one thing. That's just what it is. And that makes me a little scared for Travis Hunter, but not overly, because he's got great athletic ability, and ultimately that's what teams bet on. And so whenever somebody says, well, could you imagine if Hunter only focused on receiver or corner? I'd be like, yeah, I can. That'd be cool. What I can't imagine is him doing both. That's the thing. But anyway, so D-line, obviously Abdul Carter, ain't nothing to talk about there. But overall, look, interior D-line was crazy, but now people have cooled off. Mason Graham, I feel a little bit like I did with Jalen Carter. A little bit. Because he's not as big as Jalen Carter. But Jalen Carter in the league and in the college has some issues in certain points with getting driven off the ball. And so does not say he's not strong. Does not say he always did. But double teams, especially in college, I was like, yo, he's like 10 yards downfield. And there's times in the NFL with the Eagles I've seen that. And I've seen that with Mason Graham too. Now, Mason Graham, for me, I do think he's lighter. I don't think he's as strong. And his arms are not long. And so as much as people talk about Will Campbell and his arm length, Mason Graham's doesn't have super long arms. And so I think that showed up. where too many times he wanted to get in a tussle and he didn't win. And if you didn't win in college, you're not gonna win in the NFL. So when you think about an Aaron Donald, which is the mold, the penetrating three technique that I would put Mason Graham in. Aaron Donald specialized. I mean, he was super strong, so he could hold a block, but he specialized on getting off blocks early. And when Mason is doing that, I think he's great. When he doesn't do that, when he gets tangled up, it gets bad for him. So that to say that great prospect, but not, there's definitely a hole in the game. Walter Nolan, same thing. As far as he's got a hole in his game, and it might be his attitude and, his coachability. So a lot of people are dropping him because of that. And I don't think he's got a lot of moves. Kenneth Grant, I don't know what the fuss is about him, to be honest with you. I didn't think he was that great. Derek Harmon, tweener, transfer, which is not negative, but he's a transfer. He was at Michigan State, didn't pop, came here, had a good year, whatever, but just doesn't have the moves yet. Tyleik Williams, interesting. Alfred Collins, I think, is being slept on. TJ Sanders, for the life of me, I don't understand why he's not. Him and Shamar Turner, I don't understand why they are not up there with Mason Graham. They got the size Mason Graham doesn't. They still have just as much as juice. They need to clean their game up, but I think TJ Sanders and Shamar Turner can be game wreckers as a 3-point or as a penetrating 3-tech. And then the rest of these guys, man, I mean, it's a lot of tweeners. And on the edge, it's kind of the same thing. You either got guys coming off an injury, guys who are tweeners, or guys who need a lot of coaching, or guys who didn't put up production. It's just such a mixed grab bag going on. And especially at edge, it's so many names, which again is polar opposite than last year. And so some guys are going to get pushed down to good teams, and I think that's what some of these guys need. Mike Green, we know he got the off the field thing, and he's a small school guy. So he's somebody that I would definitely say people have their eye on. Scorton, however you say his name, from Texas A&M, I think he's kind of falling down the ladder, and he's not one of my favorites either. Mykel Williams was playing all year on the injury, so how do you evaluate him? But I think James Pierce is getting a little underrated. Landon Jackson is interesting. But the Ohio State guys, JT and Jack, I don't think they're like top of the line first round picks, but I think those are guys that would 100% be 10-year players on playoff teams. Those are guys that you want. Donovan Ezaraku, a lot of people root to the good bros. A lot of people talking about him. Doesn't. I think he's got long arms, but he still doesn't have a giant stature. And he plays hard, but I think he definitely has a lot to clean up too. And yeah, a lot of these other guys are tweeners. Jordan Birch, to me, I think he's better than. I would take Birch before Harmon. And I'm playing him at a 3-tech. I don't understand him. And what's the guy from Louisville? Ashton Gelati, however you say his name. I'm playing those guys at 3-tech. I don't understand this talk about them on the edge. Like, look, back in the day when base defensive fronts was the thing, there was a discussion about these guys at the edge and these tweeners. Because most of the time, guys that people couldn't figure out, they were 3-4 DNs. That's what they were. But we get a little bit of that. We don't, don't get me wrong. We get a little bit of that. But in the NFL, mostly is nickel. It's sub package. So you got to look at it in terms of an even front. Jordan Birch is a 3-tech. Aston Gillette, that's a 3-tech. And that's where I'm playing them. So it's a lot of intriguing things. Like I mentioned before in previous videos, the college football game has went to this odd front defense, this 3-3-5, this 3-2-6, this amoeba looking thing, and the NFL's not there yet. And so a lot of these guys were probably productive in a role that just doesn't exist in the NFL, and it not exist at a high frequency. So they're going to have to figure out what their pro positions are. But there's a lot of good athletes. For the most part, that's it. There's a lot of good athletes. I couldn't say outside of maybe Abdul Carter, there's not a ton of like great. Well, no, I take it back. Jack, I think, and JT, I think they got good technique. Mike Green too. But for the most part, it's just a lot of good athletes that teams are going to have to figure out how to mold them correctly. Linebacker, I won't say it's non-existent because we're at a point where a lot of linebackers are found later in the rounds, and we got high round linebackers too that do well, but still not a great linebacker class. Some good athletes. We'll see. Like I said, Jahad Campbell. What did I call him? Jahad Muhammad. That's crazy. Jahad Campbell out of Alabama. He's got surgery on his labrum, and so we'll see. But I do think he is probably the one true off-ball linebacker that I watch that is high, like first-round caliber. And then Jalen Walker. There's a lot of talk again. That tweener. Him and Shedeur are the two. Every year there's at least one. Those are the two prospects I am nowhere near on board with. Actually, Kelvin Banks would have been in that, but he fell off. But Jalen Walker and Shedeur, I am not on board with everybody else. I'm not sure what they're seeing. I didn't think Jalen Walker. I'm thinking, like, he's an off-ball linebacker with some pass rush juice. That's what they say. No. He didn't spend a ton of time at off-ball linebacker. I mean, he did, but comparatively from the games that I watch, he was rushing more than he was a linebacker, and he wasn't doing anything at linebacker. He had no clue what he was doing in coverage, which is the case with a lot of linebackers, but that's what separates the top prospects. And then in the run game, he's just kind of looking around and chasing stuff. And so I seen a lot of people just say he's an edge. And if he's just the edge, he's undersized. That's it. It's not a lot of 6'1" edge rushers in the league. And while I think he has burst and all that, he doesn't have moves. He doesn't have a lot of that. So to me, I think he falls. I'm not saying he's bad, but I think he falls right in the group with these other edge rushers. So yeah, linebackers kind of whatever. Corner, I didn't really evaluate it too. Yeah, that's starting to fall off my radar. But the corner group is decent. Travis Hunter, obviously you got him, but honestly, there's a lot of question marks. Even Barron from Texas, who people think he's he's might be the best after Travis Hunter. He's a nickel. At least that's what I think most teams are going to play him at. So, how much do you value that? And then after that, man, it's kind of then obviously you got Will Johnson, who I think is a great zone corner, but people are underplaying how much he's lacking man coverage at the NFL level. But again, that terms of fit. He go to the right team, he'll be straight. But corner, it's all right. Nothing that's going to shake up the draft at all. And then you get down to safety, which I think is a strong group. I don't think it's, crazy, but I think it's strong. I think there's players that people are not giving a lot of love to, like Mbuka from Texas, I think will be excellent. I think he's going to be excellent. That's a gamer. Emin Wari from South Carolina, physical freak. Tape doesn't always match that up, though. Not that it doesn't, I wouldn't say the athleticism, but it doesn't match up the production, and it doesn't match up the football IQ. Malachi Starks, I think, is great. Definitely some physical limitations, but I think he's going to be great too. but he's falling down. Kevin Winston Jr. needs a lot of work, but man, it's not a lot of pure free safeties that can go middle of the field to the sideline. And so I think he needs some polish. He needs, you hope he's healthy, but I think he's got some upside. Billy Bowman's interesting. Ransom's interesting. And there's definitely probably more safeties that I haven't seen. So that's just kind of the general overview of those groups. So yeah, like I said, I mean, deep running back class, even without me watching, I think that's for sure. I think it's going to be a heck of an interior O-line class. I'm willing to stand on that. I think we'll get some good safeties. And I think it's going to be a heck of a D-line class just because it's so many. Everybody can't miss. So, but even though it's a deep D-line class, there's not any cream of the crop besides Abdul Carter. So, as you heard, those are pretty much non-premier positions. And that leads you to a draft where, okay, well, what do we want? We know what we want and what we need, but what are we willing to give up for that? And again, like I said, a lot of times in these cases, second and third round becomes the move. And if that's the case, yes, teams want to trade, but it takes two to tango. Because you might be saying, well, you said there's no trades. If everybody wants to move back, why ain't no trades? Because nobody wants to move up. If everybody wants to move back, nobody wants to move up. So that's kind of where we're sitting. But yeah, I feel like I said a lot. I know I did because we went for an hour. But I don't know that I have anything burning on the top of my mind to talk about. So I'll leave it at that. Go to the comments. Let me know if you got questions, thoughts, theories, anything going into this draft. I'll do my best to get back to you. And thank you for listening.